So let's talk about neurotransmitters. Now, neurotransmitters, if you remember, are located in the axon terminal of the sending cell. They are held in vesicles and released when the action potential causes another kind of voltage gate, not sodium and potassium in this case, but calcium, and we'll talk about that a little later on. In any case, action potential reaches the axon terminal and releases the neurotransmitters into the synapse. Now, neurotransmitters have a very clever mechanism in order that their message will only be received by the appropriate receptors. And that is what we call the lock and key mechanism, where in this case, this is dopamine, can only be received by specific dopamine receptors that are an exact fit. So here we have the action potential coming down, and you see dopamine is released into the synapse. Now, the receptors are specifically designed to only fit dopamine because these are dopamine receptors. So the dopamine is binding with the dopamine receptors and causing a cascade of events. In this case, it's a secondary messenger to be released inside the receiving neuron. Then we have the dopamine being taken back up into the receiving cell, and some of it is being put back into vesicles, and some of it breaks down. Now, in this case, the second messenger will move over and cause an action potential within the receiving cell membrane, causing electrical impulse to be sent down the membrane. Now, this next slide is showing that some neurotransmitters are inhibitory and some of them are excitatory. And what I mean by that is some of them slow down the firing of a neuron and some of them speed it up. Now, why would we have such a mechanism? Well, think about it similar to driving. You need both an accelerator and a brake in order to have a smooth driving experience. Otherwise, it might be a little chaotic. Well, neurons are the same way. Sometimes you need to slow down the signal, and sometimes you need to speed it up. So in this case, they are trying to show that the signals coming from other neurons can either excite or inhibit the neuron from firing. The receiving neuron, in effect, calculates the sum of the excitatory and inhibitory signals and then decides whether or not to fire. The above neuron has two states. When it is in its background state, it fires slowly. But then when it gets excited, as I'm showing now, it fires more rapidly. So in this, your nervous system has a way of controlling. Sometimes you need to slow down and sometimes you need to speed up. And in this case, you see that I have more excitatory than inhibitory neurotransmitters, and so then it fired. Different types of neurotransmitters are excitatory and inhibitory. We're going to talk about the major neurotransmitters that do most of the neurotransmission in your body. So first, let's start off with acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter used by spinal cord neurons to control muscles, but when found in the brain, it is used to control movement and regulate memory. Then you have dopamine. Now, dopamine can both control movement if found in a region of the brain called the basal ganglia, or when found in the reward pathway, that is the pathway we just looked at in the slide before last, where it produces feelings of pleasure. Now, the reward pathway is kind of interesting because it has kept us alive for the last 1.3 million years by training your brain to do the things that give it pleasure, which most of the time was food and sex. But now, in modern society, we can artificially stimulate the reward pathway with drugs and sometimes exercise. But there's been a lot of research done in the effects of drugs. Now, the major inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain that kind of puts the brakes on the excitatory neurotransmitters is called GABA, which stands for gamma-aminobutyric acid, but you can call it GABA. Glutamate is the most common excitatory. It's a general neurotransmitter that is considered excitatory within the brain. The major inhibitory neurotransmitter used by neurons in the spinal cord is glycine. Now again, think of inhibitory neurotransmitters as kind of putting the brakes on, because you can't always be accelerating. You have to use your brakes once in a while. That's what inhibitory means. Now let's move this down a little bit. Now, you have two neurotransmitters that are both excitatory and inhibitory. Norepinephrine, which acts as both a neurotransmitter and a hormone. In the peripheral nervous system, it acts as a hormone as part of the fight or flight response. Now, we've talked a lot about that. The fight or flight response is an important mechanism to get you ready to face danger. However, in the brain, it acts as a neurotransmitter regulating alertness and arousal. And finally, serotonin. Serotonin is both excitatory and inhibitory. It regulates your mood, your appetite, and your sensory perception. And it is really important that you know the different functions of each of these neurotransmitters, because we will be talking about disorders associated with each one of them. Thank you.